Let's just jump right in, Dave. I've been wondering, with the return to meetings in these last couple of years, some things are the same, some things are different as they were prior to the big shakeup with COVID, and certainly the economy is different. Certainly things feel different now. Do you feel like, as far as performing under pressure, do you feel like the pressure to perform is either more or less than it was a few years ago? Where are we at with that now as a speaker on the stage?
I'd actually say there's a little bit of both. I think there are fewer people who are trying to be speakers. That's just, and I don't have empirical evidence for that, but that feels like to me, if you go back, let's say years, even be it prior to COVID, but back from then, there are fewer people who are striving to become speakers.
Very true.
So in that respect, I think it's easier. So the pressure is less to become a speaker. But I think the pressure is greater, and I think it's harder to become really good at it.
Why do you think that is?
I think that is because, in part, there are fewer opportunities. At least what I'm feeling like is there are fewer opportunities. People are more comfortable with virtual type of dissemination of information and things like that. But for those organizations and companies that really value in-person speaking, and so when the speaking I'm referring to is the in-person live speaking, not the virtual type. So the companies and the organizations that really value that kind have, I think, very high expectations for the people they choose.
Sure.
Now, the natural competitor in me is like, bring it on. But still, sometimes the expectations are so high that they're hard to meet. So with respect to the entry into speaking, I think technology and the fact that you can speak virtually as well as in person has opened it up to a lot more people can be, but it's more difficult, I think, and perhaps a greater pressure placed on those who really want to be good at it.
That really naturally highlights the need also to work with coaches to be able to improve your skills, truthfully. And ultimately, I want to point out, like, we're just kind of going off script here. We don't really have a script. We're just having a conversation here. We didn't really pre-think this, but what it makes me think of is, where it feels like we're seeing more and more and more in-person meetings now to where people can be gone all the time. But I think the challenge as a planner that I'm seeing, and I'm hearing from some of my meeting planner friends, is it feels like it's harder and harder to get people to the meetings.
Are you speaking of attendees or speakers?
In person. It's like
in person.
Get people there, because, like you're saying, there are still so many virtual, and we all relate to that. It's just easier virtually. That's a really great question and answer. Thank you. I'm going to continue.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, I think that therein presents some of the pressure elements for the people who are trying to be good at it, because in order to attract attendees to come not just once but return, you better be good. And so that's why, speaking certainly as a profession is every bit as difficult and time consuming, etc., as any other profession, whether it's sports or otherwise. And me coming from the sports background, I equate it a lot to being an athlete.
It's true. This is true. Well, so we're talking about getting better and better and better at our presentation skills, our content, really crafting our content tightly so that we hit it out of the park. So when that speech goes really well, can we still learn something from that? Your focuses are about performing under pressure. So in that case, I'm picturing that we feel pretty good. We feel pretty comfortable. So are we still learning?
I hope so, because I think the psychological tendency is when something goes well and you get that feedback from the audience, it's like, okay, I knocked it out of the park, I can move on. And so it's really easy to sort of box that up, put it on the shelf and say, check that one off. Good job. Let me move on to the next one. However, what I believe happens at the highest levels of performance, whether it's in speaking, sports, or whatever, it's really a more process-oriented focus rather than outcome. So if your focus is solely on outcome, it's, did I get through it? Did I get paid? Did I do a good job? Did I get good reviews? If I did, move on. That was my goal, so I'm done. But to be really good at something, you have to be willing to break it down, even the successes, because at the end of the day, high-level performance can get pretty ugly. And I was talking to a speaker earlier today, actually, who gave what they felt like was a really, really good speech, like perhaps the best of their career. Yet when they told me about it, they forgot a story at the beginning. They put it back in midway through. The audience had no idea, absolutely loved it. And the whole flow of it still worked, but was it the way that they diagrammed it? Not even close. So here's someone who's a professional speaker at the peak of their skills, rehearsed it, practice, ready, all those things. Still, it, from just a flow standpoint, was like, oh my gosh.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yet they made it work, and it ended up, the audience didn't know any different. So from that standpoint, you've got to be willing to break it down, because there are a lot of opportunities to still learn, even when things go well.
I love that. And so really it's that idea of building into your workflow as a speaker, in the aftermath, the debrief with yourself, actually, like that, being aware of what worked, what didn't work, what would I do differently. I was sharing with someone earlier today, another meeting planner, that when I sit during my meeting and I participate, as an observer in Weevolution, I'm sitting back and I'm thinking, this is what I'll do differently next year. And this worked well and this didn't work well. And I think it's that same idea. And I think that the really savvy speakers would do that.
Well, I think it follows into the philosophy of pursuing excellence.
Yes.
This is not a destination. It's really a way of being in your profession. And there's, as we know, the environment around us is constantly changing and evolving, and including the people who are in the audience listening to us. And if you have that be your ultimate goal, which is to continue to evolve with the profession, there's always work to be done, always a new message, always a different way to present it, maybe technology that you can incorporate. That's, to me, kind of what keeps people excited and engaged in it.
100%. And it makes you more hireable in the future, because planners know that you don't repeat the same old, same old, same old. Well, let's look at the opposite of this. So we had talked about what happens if it's perfect, what if it goes really well? Well, what if it's not perfect? What if it was not what we had expected or hoped for? Is there a process or strategy or something to help us be able to get the most we can from that experience as well?
There is, at least from how I look at it, and it depends on it depends on how bad it went. So there are some instances in which it goes so poorly from your perspective. Now, it may not be the audience perspective, but from your perspective, that you really can't bear to watch it. And it's really difficult from a stress response standpoint to even watch the presentation yourself. But that's one of the first things that helps to desensitize you to the impact, is to, if it's on video, rewatch. So that would be my first thing, is no matter what, and that would go for the presentation or speech that went well, is rewatch it. But especially the one where you left something out, you left something on the table, wasn't my best effort, watch it through. Because then and again, the athlete in me is like, look, you got to be willing to own your outcomes here, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So watch it. If you don't have it on video, then you've got to be willing to ask somebody for feedback who you trust, who will tell you the truth. That takes courage. But being great at something, and I'm not talking just good, I'm talking about excellent at something, requires courage.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of opportunity to gloss over things and say, oh, it's okay. Nobody barely noticed. They barely noticed that you had a silent pause in there of, 30 seconds. Oh, we didn't even notice. Yeah, probably did.
30 seconds is a long time.
Long time.
Yeah.
So you've got to be willing to get feedback. And if it's you watching, it would be the first step. But even then, even if you do have it on video, I think the feedback from people you trust
Mhm.
goes a lot toward sort of disengaging your ego from it
Right.
and not being afraid of the feedback. Because at the highest levels of sport, you mentioned it earlier in our chat, that it really underlines this process of pursuing excellence, underlines the importance for coaching. Well,
Mhm.
all coaching is feedback.
Mhm.
It's feedback with some experience attached to it.
Mhm.
So you've got to be willing to get that feedback if you're going to continue to grow and progress in anything. And speaking is no different.
There were so many great tips in there, multiple things I had thought of, but I'm only going to share one just in the interest of keeping us going. It reminds me of the importance of videotaping every time we speak, because I would assume that there'll be times when someone feels like, oh, I bombed, and they went back and say later, when they look at it later, oh, it wasn't that bad. Or there might even be times they thought they did really great, but then they start realizing like, oh, I didn't realize I was holding the, what do you call it, the little clicker thing that
Yeah.
way. Or I wish I would, like once they're step out of it and be that observer, what a powerful thing. So even if you had someone in the audience who, just did it on their phone for you, would be such a valuable feedback.
But that takes humility too, Vanessa. That takes humility to do it. And not all of us have that humility.
Yeah.
For different reasons. Sometimes we think we're better than we are. Other times we can't bear to look because we don't think of ourselves nearly as favorably as we should.
Mm.
So it could be either way. But the part of the growth mindset that we all are very familiar with is the using mistakes and as feedback, and
Mhm.
not being so blind to the fact that you never make a mistake. As I just mentioned, the really, really pro speaker I spoke to earlier today botched the presentation of a lifetime, but you would have never known.
Mhm.
So,
That's a pro.
well, and the right there gives you trust.
Yes.
So what we're all doing this for, why you go to a coach and why you practice as much as you do and all those things, is ultimately so you can trust under pressure that no matter what happens, you'll find a way through it in a reasonable and professional way. May
Right.
not be perfect, but you'll be able to recover and still finish gracefully.
Mm-hmm. Boy,
That's what.
that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that. As we were talking about performing under pressure, I was thinking how some people just feel like they're really good at this. Like maybe they're someone who works in an operating room and they're always able to handle like, unexpected emergencies, or where it feels like we might know other people, or we might ourselves be people where we feel like I just don't do that well under pressure. Is it something maybe we're wired with, or are we born with the ability to be really good at this?
I think that some people are born with a personality trait to be better under stress in general.
Okay.
So a calmer response to all the physiological responses that go along with stress, the hormones and the neurotransmitters and all of that. I think some of us, I'm not putting myself in that boat, but I think some people are born with a basically cocktail of those uh, chemicals, if you will, neurochemicals that probably align themselves better with performing under pressure. But you still have to put the work in and develop skills.
Yeah.
And my view is that ultimately the skills overcome the traits.
Mm.
In other words, you can work to become quite good under pressure. Now, there are different levels of pressure, right? Speaking in front of a group of 100 people, for some people, that's like almost close to dying. I mean, there are fewer things that are worse for them. The people who are choosing to pursue speaking either part-time or full-time, in most cases don't fall into that category because they would have never have even thought
Chosen it, yeah.
chosen to step up in front of people to convey a message.
Mm-hmm.
But I think whereas some people are born with that kind of response to stress that comes a little bit easier to them, confidence in speaking is situational. Confidence in general is a state versus a trait. So it's situational versus permanent.
Oh, that's true.
Because what you might be confident with, I can assure you I wouldn't be, because I have zero experience with it. I have zero knowledge of it. Put me in the situations that you do every day, and I would be a disaster.
Same, right?
And
Same.
perhaps the same, but that is more of a function of training
Mm-hmm.
and talent.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of flip to the side and land on the side of training overcomes talent in this particular instance.
Wow. So let's talk about the training. So
Okay.
that we're saying that if you aren't naturally wired that way, or if you want to increase those skills, what can you do to get better?
Well, first of all is prepare. There's no substitute for knowing your stuff. And that's, I tell every client I have, speaking or otherwise, there's no there's no substitute for the preparation of learning your craft,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it might be.
Which is why that person, pardon me, why he could just switch and put the story in a different place, is I bet on the platform as he was delivering this, he was probably in his mind mentally figuring out where he could tuck it, I would assume.
Well, because he knew that presentation so well that
Yes.
he knew exactly, okay, I forgot, I'm just going to put it on the shelf here for a second and then drop it back in here. Now that is exceptional, because if you don't know the presentation that well, as soon as you move past that story, you can't remember it anymore, because what we know about when your brain is under pressure, your focus narrows and your memory decays.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when you get under extreme pressure, you forget things. I can't remember I don't know. What did I do? I don't remember what I did. That's it's your brain is wired that way. But in this particular case of the example I mentioned, he knew it so well that it didn't matter. He could easily insert it in there with no problem. But the first,
there by preparing.
Yeah, the first step is there's no substitute for knowing your stuff.
Right.
And then the second one is you've got to practice. And we all know this. You've got to practice speaking. And then once you know your stuff, you develop the message, you practice it, then you've got to put yourself into varying situations where it's going to trigger this perception of pressure. And that's where we get into this kind of systematic desensitization that you go through of bigger and bigger audiences, let's say.
Right. Right. And when you keep having good results and you feel comfortable and being able to bring it on, that is so interesting. It makes me think about a certification course I recently finished that was about 80 hours of work. And it was to be able to be a teacher in certain lifestyle habits. And you leave with like a 400-page manual that's just supposed to help you like teach it. So first of all, it wasn't my content, right? So we hope for anybody listening out there, you're actually working with your own content. Like, so you go and you learn something. And what I'm finding is every time I teach that, I just keep realizing it's just far too much stuff. I've got to reorganize it. I've got to do it better. And that's part of that number one step you're talking about.
Yep.
I think that if I was to speak on this right now on the platform, right now I've just been doing like student teaching, but when I get to on the platform, I want to be able to know it so well that you can pull from your hip pocket if some question comes up. And I've heard in the past some of our other faculty members that are content development experts talk about the true pro is the one that can show up with no PowerPoint, with no notes. They would be able to just talk on their presentation on this topic by just taking what the audience needs and I'm aspiring. It's like, I think that's a true pro. And that would also be some pressure.
Well, it would. At the same time, I think that as long as you know, again, you know your core topic,
Yeah.
I find that if you can engage the audience, and it depends on the venue and the type of presentation you're giving, but if you can engage the audience and start to create a synergy between you and the attendees, where there's a sharing of information or sharing of ideas or asking of questions, that's when the relative experience for everybody goes to another level, because now there's an exchange,
Yeah.
not just you speaking. And to me, that's where this concept of flow and peak experience really resides, is when there's actually an exchange of energy between you and the audience.
Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that makes me excited to think about. That's pretty cool. Well, I wonder, before we go, is there anything that we haven't talked about in this area, performing under pressure, that would be helpful to speakers to know about as we close out our time together? Is there something that comes to mind that we should leave as kind of our final thought?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, anyone can get good at this. So I think that I want people to leave with hope that if you're willing to put in the effort and put in the work, that you can get comfortable. Now, will you be, a seasoned pro, like, those famous speakers that we all know of? I don't know, maybe not. But can you be comfortable and give a compelling message to any group of people? I think you absolutely can. It takes work, it takes effort, but so does anything that's really meaningful and important. So I would like for people to have hope.
Oh, awesome. And that they can do it. I love that. Thank you. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being here. And
No, thanks for having me. It's been a great time.
it's always a fun time to talk with you. And our group loves hearing from you. So glad you're here. And we're going to head back into the summit now. So here we go.